Hello ladies and gentlemen, Deviance Shadow Prophecy back once again with another daily discussion. Today's topic will be on the Bushiroad World Championship tournament structure as well as Bushiroad events in general. So we've seen the transition over the last few years of the actual tournament structure that Bushiroad has been implementing, at least for Cardfight Vanguard. So it used to be that every single event was best of one over one day, and that was it. And a lot of players didn't like this, and that's fair enough. I personally don't like a best of one at all. Granted, I understand there is no way to sideboard, as there is in other games, against your opponent, meaning that there's no way for you to essentially add in an element of counterplay into your deck after the first or second game. However, if your opponent gets trigger lucky, or you no-guard them at 3 damage and they pull a double critical, that can essentially end your tournament career. That can end your run through the tournament. If you're X and 1, I know a lot of Bushiroad tournaments used to be double elimination, so the second that you lost 2 games, you were out. You were just out of the tournament. You couldn't keep playing in it anymore, which they've changed. Thankfully, it's now Swiss the whole way through, meaning that generally your X and 2s will get to the top 8, which is fantastic. Swiss is way better than just straight up double elimination in a card game anyway. But back to it being double elimination, if you were at X and 1 and you no-guard your opponent at 3 damage, they pull a double critical, you are out. That's it. Sorry, come back next time. Unfortunately, you can't get through. And that's a big problem. That means that if someone goes on a hot streak and they just pull a few triggers in a couple of games, they're going to immediately have an advantage over those players that naturally don't pull any triggers because, well, triggers will decide games one way or another, being it a loss or a win. And whoever pulls more triggers is more likely to win, give or take. Obviously, there's exceptions to this, but if your opponent crits your first, second, and third turn, you're probably in a bit of trouble anyway. So there's probably not a whole lot you can do in that game. So we've seen the transition from best of one, double elimination, to now a Swiss tournament that is still best of one, which is better because essentially the advantage with Swiss is that if there were no side events going on, the X and 2s didn't have anything to do. So if they say they missed the fires or the queues for the side events, just because they wanted to actually play in the tournament and do that sort of thing, they essentially go down and they go X and 2 and they can't do anything. They've wasted. Well, not wasted, but they've spent a lot of time going to the actual tournament, paid money for if they had to travel, if they had to stay somewhere, essentially making sure that their deck was up to date, the amount of time they put into playtesting the deck, things like that. And if your opponent just gets lucky with like critical triggers or a heal trigger on their 6th damage or something like that, that can be really disheartening. And a lot of players were really disheartened in the Bushiroad tournament structure for a very long time, which is why I think we've started to see the shift into Swiss. Because essentially Swiss, it doesn't matter how many losses you have, you can elect to drop from the tournament or not. So essentially once you go X and 2, you go, okay, I need to win all my matches to even consider making top 8. And the second you go X and 3, you can be like, well, I still want to keep playing in the tournament just to see how I go, like where I will end up. Or you can go, you know what, I'm gonna drop out of the tournament and I'm just gonna play side events or go see vendors or do whatever you want to do. Just like if you only wanted to go down there to make top 8 and you go X and 3, unfortunately you obviously you can't make it. But that's the advantage of Swiss over double elim. You always have the option to keep playing through the tournament, as opposed to you've lost 2. You're out. Sorry, bud. Better luck next time. We've also seen the adaptation from Bushiroad to use 2-day events, which are all rounds are best of 3. Sorry, I should preface this by mentioning that now all top 8 events are best of 3, even if it's a 1-day tournament in Swiss, which is great. Top 8 should always be best of 3, even best of 5. Best of 5 is a bit too much, but best of 3 definitely. But now we see these 2-day tournaments coming along that are all best of 3 the whole way through. Fantastic. Awesome. But your records don't carry over. So you need to go X and 2 to make day 2. And then you need to go X and 2 again. Essentially meaning if you're already X and 2, you essentially, if records carried over, you shouldn't be able to lose again, because if you need X and 2 to make it to the top 8, that is essentially how that should work. And every other card game does this. Every other card game carries the record from players over from day 1 to day 2. So let's say I'm playing in a GP at Magic, and day 1 is 9 rounds, and I go 6 and 3, which is enough to make it to day 2. I know that I go in to day 2 with a record of 6 and 3, and will be paired up against another person who is also 6 and 3, most likely, unless I get paired up against someone 7 and 2. So that means I need to win all my other games to get to essentially 12 and 3, which gives me a pretty good shot at making top 8. So obviously anyone that goes 13 and 2 or 14 and 1, 15 and 0, they're obviously going to get in the top 8 above me. But essentially once you get to 12 and 3 in a Magic GP, you just offer draws throughout. If you're 12 and 2 at the end of 14 rounds, going into your round 15, you'll just offer an intentional draw, getting both you and your opponent to 12, 2 and 1, which is essentially a good enough record to essentially make top 8, because people with the point score below you won't be able to overtake you in that manner, if that makes sense. So anyone on 11 wins won't be able to jump you, because you're essentially 12 X amount of losses and 1 draw, and draws do count for points as well. So a win is 3, a loss is obviously 0, and a draw is 1. And you need, I believe it's 36 points to make it into the top 8. Give or take, obviously it changes at every tournament, but that's sort of what you essentially aim for in a Magic tournament. Given that it is 15 rounds, 2 days, things like that. But Vanguard, essentially, once you have made day 2, your record is scrapped. So you need to work. So essentially, let's say you go undefeated day 1. Let's say in day 1 there's 8 or 9 rounds of Swiss. I don't know how many rounds there are normally at Bushiroad events. But essentially, let's say you go 9 and 0 day 1. You've blitzed the competition and you make day 2, and then you go 0 and 3. You don't make top 8. How disheartening is that as a player? To go, well, essentially, sorry, let's say you lose your first 2 matches day 2, and then win all the others, and you don't make top 8. That's ridiculous. Records carry over for a reason. They essentially allow you to dictate your pairings for the next day. So anyone that goes undefeated, so let's say we'll base it off the same amount of rounds as Magic. So we'll say 9 rounds, but 9 rounds day 1. So you go 9 and 0 day 1, and you go into day 2 where your record carries over. You'll be going up against someone who's either 8 and 1 or 9 and 0, same as you. Just because of the way that Swiss works, you'll get paired up against the people who are doing the same as you. So for records to be scrapped, you can be 9 and 0 and versus someone who went 6 and 3, which is still a good enough record to make it through, given normal Magic tournament rules, things like that. Essentially, I'm basing this off of a Magic tournament structure as opposed to a Vanguard tournament structure. So I'm just comparing the two here. So you make it through undefeated versus this other guy who went 6 and 2 day 1, and he beats you. First of all, the match shouldn't have happened in the first place, because you should be versing somebody else who went 9 and 0, 8 and 1. If you lose, you go undefeated day 1, your record doesn't carry, and you go 0 and 2. I'm sorry, but you've cost yourself top 8. That's not fair on players. Bushiroad needs to adapt their tournament structure to be more like every other card game in existence. Records must carry over. It's just a lot fairer on all the players. And I get it's a good leveling ground if newer players and essentially not as many competitive players who haven't played any TCGs before come in and they go, oh, cool, records don't carry over. That's awesome. When in fact, it's really not. It's essentially giving no incentive for players to not offer intentional draws on day 1 to make day 2. So essentially, again, I'm not particularly sure how Bushiroad's tournament system handles draws. in a best 2 out of 3. I'm not sure if it's still worth 1 point or whether it's just a 0. That obviously will change depending on that. So essentially, if you make, so again, 9 rounds, and you are 6 and 1. Sorry, 6 and 2 going into the last round. So essentially, that means that you can offer an ID, in which case you'll go 6, 2, and 1, meaning that anyone else who is 6 and 1, if they decide to play, they will jump you in. The winner of those matches will jump you in score, essentially meaning you may not make day 2. Or you can decide to play to try and get better positioning for day 2. Now, essentially, because the records don't carry over, every single person is going to offer an intentional draw. Every single person that is 6 and 1, or even 6 and 2, they're all going to offer intentional draws because there's no incentive for them to play. There's no incentive for them to play out the game to risk them not making day 2. And this is a big problem. It's because essentially they go, oh, records don't carry over, so I only need to go, and they know that records of 6 and 2 or better will move on. So there you go, I'll offer an ID, and essentially you have the issue where, oh, we've got heaps of people at 6, 2, and 1, or 6, 1, 1. So all the 6, 1, 1s will get in ahead of your 6, 2, 1s. Which essentially means if they've only got a limited amount of spaces that they can offer to day 2 people, I'm not sure, again, how this works or not, but normally it's about, you know, top 64, top 128, something along those lines will make it to day 2, mainly. Essentially, what that means is because the records are scrapped, that 6, 2, and 1 doesn't matter. So all the players that strove to be like, oh yeah, I went undefeated day 1 to get a massive record for tomorrow, it doesn't matter. And that's a big issue that I think Bushiroad really, really needs to address moving forward with their tournament structure. They really need to make sure that players are rewarded for their achievements in tournaments. We see, at least we're starting to get a bit of prize support throughout the Bushiroad World Championship because that was non-existent before, which is fantastic. But again, a lot of the Bushiroad tournaments, the prize pool doesn't really reflect the player base. So let's say, for instance, you have, and I get that it's free entry, but if you started to charge $5, $10, $15 for entry and gave away like a box of the newest set or cash prizes to first, second, third, or even like do what Magic does, like they scale your winnings based on where you come. So let's say, for instance, you go into a GP, entry is $100, give or take. First place walks out with 10 grand. Second place walks out with, I think it's 5 grand. Third and fourth walk out with 2.5 each. And then it slowly goes down like throughout there. So I think top 16 each get like $500 US, which is great because we're here in Australia, so the exchange rate is actually in our favor there. That's really good. That's a really good way to run a tournament system. Encourage your players to come in and do well and really reward the players that do, rather than, and as well as like an invite to worlds and all that sort of stuff, because you budget your prizes on the amount of players you expect to come to the event. Like Magic is huge. The last GP I went to, I think, had over 2,500 participants in it, which is phenomenal. Like they made $250,000 just there. So then obviously you need to obviously minus the venue cost, as well as getting like your head judge there, because I believe he gets paid for it, as well as the like camera crews, all that sort of stuff, your merchandising rights, all that sort of stuff, and then you get paid again by your vendors for allowing them to be there. So you're essentially making profit off that as well. And yeah, vendors make a little bit of, like, they make money obviously for being there, and hopefully they make a profit. They probably normally do make a profit on selling cards while they're there, because everybody's like, oh, I need to change my deck before, like the night before GP. I'm going to change my deck. I want to build something new. Things like that. So vendors, again, make money off that, which is another thing Bushiroad if you are watching this, or if you ever get to watch this, make sure that there are vendors at your event, because that's really, really good for players to be able to, and not only that, it actually helps the secondary market of the game, which is fantastic, and another topic for another day. We also need to talk about the frequency and the locations of Bushiroad events, like actual Bushiroad events. So you can hold a shop tournament anywhere. That's fine. That doesn't matter. You can do that with any card game at any shop, and it's pretty easy to do. But the actual championship series, there are not enough events at all. They should be running events all the time. Well, not all the time. That's a bit too much. But they essentially cut, I think it was a third of the locations out of their tournament series. So I believe there were, like, last year there were, oh my god, I can't even, like, 30 to 40 different locations, I believe, that were actual Bushiroad events, and now I believe there's, like, maybe 20. Maybe. So they've essentially cut it massively. They cut a lot of different events out, and that's not very good. Like, here in Australia, we only get one shot. So we get a shot, meaning there's one representative that gets to come from Australia to get to participate in the Bushiroad World Championship. Is that fair? Yes, no, maybe so. That's again, not really what this discussion is about. But essentially, if you were to hold one in, say, Brisbane, or, say, like Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, you'd get the same amount of players at all three events, because essentially the grand prize is a ticket to the World Championship, which is a big deal. Players would play in those events, and that's what I don't think you understand. Obviously, you don't want Worlds to be too big, but you can have more than one representative from one country. Like, people in America, yes, they have to travel, obviously, but players are willing to travel to the events that they can travel to. And some players will even go to every single event just to grind, to try to get to the World Championship, and essentially just play the game that they enjoy. So I think that we need more tournaments in your tournament series. More events in more locations would be absolutely fantastic. The revenue that you would actually see from that would definitely outweigh the costs that you would have to put down. Stop going into tournaments thinking like an Eastern company, and adapt to the westernized businesses that you'd be dealing with. Like, for instance, here in Australia, Chainlinks runs a lot of the Magic events, and they are fantastic at it. Every event that I've been to for Magic so far has been absolutely well put on. Couldn't fault anything about it. You know, every time it was staffed well, there were heaps of vendors, always near a place where you'd be able to get food, plenty of hotels around there for you to stay at if you need to travel, always in a big city, so there's always something to do if you do happen to drop from the tournament and want to do something else. You know, Bushiroad can reach out to these companies that hold tournaments for other companies like Konami, like Magic, like Wizards, and just even discuss why they do what they do, and essentially move into them thinking, yes, we would like for these companies to hold our tournaments because it's putting our best foot forward, giving our players what they want. And I think that will be a good step in the right direction. And I think that's all I have to say on this topic for now. So I would like to, again, as always, leave your opinion down below if you agree with what I said, if you disagree, what your opinions on the current tournament structure are, as well as what you would like to see in the future. And as always, I am Deviance Shadow Prophecy, and I will see you next time.